Our Lady of the Flowers by Genet, page 129. To love a murderer, to love to commit a crime in cahoots with the young half-breed pictured on the cover of the torn book. I want to sing murder, for I love murderers. To sing it plainly, without pretending, for example, that I want to be redeemed through it, though I do yearn for redemption. I would like to kill. As I've said above, rather than an old man, I would like to kill a handsome blonde boy, so that already united by the verbal link that joins the murderer and the murdered, each existing thanks to the other, I may be visited during days and nights of hopeless melancholy by a handsome ghost, of which I would be the haunted castle. But may I be spared the horror of giving birth to a 60-year-old corpse, or that of a woman, young or old. I am tired of satisfying my desire for murder stealthily by admiring the imperial pomp of sunsets. My eyes have bathed in them enough. Let's get to my hands. But to kill you, Jean, wouldn't it be a question of knowing how I would behave as I watched you die by my hand? More than of anyone else, I am thinking of Pilorge. His face, cut out of detective magazine, darkens the wall with its icy radiance, which is made up of his Mexican corpse, his will to death, his dead youth, and his death. He spatters the wall with a brilliance that can be expressed only by the confrontation of the two terms that cancel each other. Night emerges from his eyes and spreads over his face, which begins to look like pines on stormy nights. That face of his, which is like the gardens where I used to spend the night. Light trees, the opening in a wall, and iron railings, astounding railings, festooned railings, and light trees. Oh, Pilorge, your face, like a lone nocturnal garden in worlds where suns spin round, and on it that impalpable sadness, like the light trees in the garden. Your face is dark, as if in broad daylight a shadow had passed over your soul. It must have made you slightly cool, for your body shuddered with a shudder more subtle than the fall of a veil on the tool known as the gossamer fine tool. For your face is veiled with thousands of fine, light, microscopic wrinkles, painted rather than engraved in crisscross lines. Already the murderer compels my respect, not only because he has known a rare experience, but because he has suddenly set himself up as a god on an altar, whether of shaky boards or azure air. I am speaking, to be sure, of the conscious, even cynical murderer, who dares take it upon himself to deal death without trying to refer his acts to some power of a given order. For the soldier who kills does not assume responsibility, nor does the lunatic, nor the jealous man, nor the one who knows he will be forgiven, but rather the man who is called an outcast, who, confronted only with himself, still hesitates to behold himself at the bottom of a pit into which, with his feet together, he has, curious prospector, hurled himself with a ludicrously bold leap. A lost man. Pilorge, my little one, my friend, my liqueur, your lovely hypocritical head has got the axe. 20 years old. You were 20 or 22, and I am. I envy you your glory. You would have done me in, as they say in jail, just as you did in the Mexican. During your months in the cell, you would have tenderly spat heavy oysters from your throat and nose on my memory. I would go to the guillotine very easily, since others have gone to it, particularly Pilorge, Wiedemann, Angelson, and Soclay. Besides, I am not sure that I shall be spared it, for I have dreamed myself in many agreeable lives. My mind, which is eager to please me, has concocted glorious and charming adventures for me, made especially to order. The sad thing about it, I sometimes think, that the greater part of these creations are utterly forgotten, though they constitute the whole of my past spiritual concert. I no longer even know that they existed, and if I happen now to dream one of these, I assume it is a new one. I embark upon my theme. I drift along without remembering that I embarked upon it 10 years earlier, and that it sank down, exhausted, into the sea of oblivion. What monsters continue their lives in my depths? Perhaps their exhalations or their excrements or their decomposition hatch at my surface some horror or beauty that I feel is elicited by them. I recognize their influence, the charm of their melodrama. My mind continues to produce lovely chimeras, but so far none of them has taken on flesh. Never. Not once. If I now try to indulge in a daydream, my throat goes dry. Despair burns my eyes. Shame makes me bow my head. My reverie breaks up. I know that once again a possible happiness is escaping me, and escapes me because I dreamed it. The despondency that follows makes me feel somewhat like a shipwrecked man who spies a sail, sees himself saved, and suddenly remembers that the lens of his spyglass has a flaw, a blurred spot. The sail he has seen. And since what I have never dreamed remains accessible, and as I have never dreamed misfortunes, there remains little for me to live but misfortunes, and misfortunes to die, for I have dreamed magnificent deaths for myself in war, as a hero, covered elsewhere with honors, and never by the gallows. So I still have something left. And what must I do to get it? Almost nothing more. Our Lady of the Flowers had nothing in common with the murderers of whom I have spoken. He was, one might say, an innocent murderer. To come back to Pilorge, whose face and death haunt me, at the age of 20, he killed Escudero, his lover, in order to rob him of a pittance. During the trial, he jeered at the court. Awakened by the executioner, he jeered at him too. Awakened by the spirit of the Mexican, sticky with hot, sweet-smelling blood, he would have laughed in his face. Awakened by the shade of his mother, he would have flouted it tenderly. And so, Our Lady was born of my love for Pilorge, with a smile in his heart, and on his bluish-white teeth a smile that fear, which made his eyes start out of his head, will not tear away. One day, while idling in the street, Darling met a woman of about 40, who suddenly fell madly in love with him. I sufficiently hate the women who are in love with my lovers to admit that this one powders her fat red face with white face powder, and this light cloud makes her look like a family lampshade with a transparent pink muslin lining. She has the slick, familiar, well-heeled charm of a lampshade. When he walked by, Darling was smoking, and a slit of abandon in the woman's hardness of soul chanced just then to be open. A slit that catches the hook cast by innocent-looking objects. If one of your openings happens to be loosely fastened, or a flap of your softness to be floating, you're done for. Instead of holding his cigarette between the first joint of the forefinger and the middle finger, Darling was pinching it with his thumb and forefinger and covering it with the other fingers, the way men and even small boys usually hold their pricks when they piss at the foot of a tree or into the night. The woman, when he spoke to Divine about her, Darling referred to her as the floozy, and Divine called her that woman, was unaware of the virtue of that position, and as far as certain details are concerned of the position itself. But its spell therefore acted upon her all the more promptly. She knew, though without knowing why, that Darling was a hard guy. Because to her, a hard guy was, above all, a male with a heart-on. She became mad about him. But she came too late. Her round curves and soft femininity no longer acted upon Darling, who was now used to the hard contact of a stiff penis. At the woman's side, he remained inert. The gulf frightened him. Still, he made an effort to overcome his distaste and keep the woman attached to him in order to get money from her. He acted gallantly eager, but a day came when, unable to bear it any longer, he admitted that he loved earlier he might have said a boy, but now he has to say a man, for Divine is a man. A man, then. The lady was outraged and uttered the word "Barry." Darling slapped her and left, but he did not want his dessert to escape him. Divine was his steak, and he went back to wait for her one day at the St. Lazare station, where she got off, for she came in every day from Versailles. The St. Lazare station is the movie star's station. Our Lady of the Flowers, still and already wearing the light, baggy, youthful, preposterously thin, and in a word, ghost-like grey flannel suit that he was wearing the day of the crime, and that he will be wearing the day of his death, came there to buy a ticket for Le Havre. Just as he got to the platform, he dropped his wallet, which was stuffed with the 20,000-franc notes. He felt it slip from his pocket and turned around just in time to see it being picked up by Darling. Calmly and fatally, Darling examined it, for though he was a genuine crook, nevertheless he did not know how to be at ease in original postures, and imitated the gangster of Chicago and Marseille. This simple observation also enables us to indicate the importance of dreaming in the life of the hoodlum. But what I want particularly to show you by means of it is that I shall surround myself only with roughnecks of undistinguished personality, with none of the nobility that comes from heroism. My loved ones will be those whom you would call hoodlums of the worst sort. Darling counted the bills. He took 10 for himself, put them into his pocket, and handed the rest to Our Lady, who stood there dumbfounded. They became friends. I leave you free to imagine any dialogue you please. Choose whatever may charm you. Have it, if you like, that they hear the voice of the blood, or that they fall in love at first sight, or that Darling, by indisputable signs invisible to the vulgar eye, betrays the fact that he is a thief. Conceive the wildest improbabilities. Have it that the depths of their being are thrilled at accosting each other in slang. Tangle them suddenly in a swift embrace or a brotherly kiss. Do whatever you like. Darling was happy to find the money. However, with an extreme lack of appropriateness, all he could say without unclenching his teeth was, "Guy's no dope." Our Lady was boiling. But what could he do? He was too familiar with the Pigalle Blanche to know that you must not put on too boldly a front with a real pimp. Darling bore quite visibly the external marks of the pimp. "Have to watch my step," Our Lady felt within him. So he lost his wallet, which Darling had noticed. Here's the sequel. Darling took Our Lady of the Flowers to a tailor, a shoe shop, and a hat shop. He ordered for both of them the bagatelles that make the strong and terribly charming man, a suede belt, a felt hat, a plaid tie, etc. Then they stopped at a hotel on the Avenue de Wagram. Wagram, battle won by boxers. They spent their time doing nothing. As they walked up and down the Champs-Élysées, they let intimacy fuse them. They made comments about the women's legs, but as they were not witty, their remarks had no finesse. Since their motion was not torn by any point, they quite naturally skidded along on a stagnant ground of poetry. They were child roughnecks to whom chance had given gold, and I enjoy giving it to them, just as I enjoy hearing an American hood, it's amazing, say the word dollar and speak English. When they were tired, they went back to the hotel and sat for a long time in the big leather chairs in the lobby. Even there, intimacy evolved its alchemy. A solemn marble stairway led to corridors covered with red carpets, upon which one moved noiselessly. During a high mass at the Madeleine, when Darling saw the priests walking on carpets, after the organ had stopped playing, he began to feel uneasy at the mystery of the deaf and the blind, the tread upon the carpets that he recognizes in the Grand Hotel, and as he walks slowly over the moss, he thinks, in his gutter-snipe language, maybe there's something. For low masses are set at the end of the halls of big hotels, where the mahogany and marble light and blow-out candles. A mingled burial service and marriage takes place there in secret from one end of the year to the other. People move about like shadows. Does this mean that my ecstatic crook soul let slip no opportunity for falling into a trance? Oh, to feel yourself flying on tiptoe while the souls of humans move flat on the ground. Even here, and at the Fraise prison, the long, fragrant corridors that bite their tails restore to me, despite the precise mathematical hardness of the wall, the soul of the hotel thief I long to be. The stylish clients move about the lobby in front of them. They took off their furs, gloves, and hats, drank port, and smoked Craven cigarettes and Havana cigars. A bellboy scurried about. They knew they were characters in a movie, and so, mingling their gestures in this dream, Darling and Our Lady of the Flowers quietly wove a brotherly friendship. How hard it is for me not to mate the two of them better, not to arrange it so that Darling, with a thrust of the hips, rock of unconsciousness and innocence, desperate with love, deeply sinks his smooth, heavy prick, as polished and warm as a column in the sun, into the waiting mouth of the adolescent murderer, who is pulverized with gratitude. That, too, might be, but will not. Darling and Our Lady, however rigorous the destiny I plot for you, it will never cease to be, oh, in the very faintest way, tormented by what it might also have been, but will not be, because of me. One day, Our Lady quite naturally confessed to the murder. Darling confessed in his life with Divine. Our Lady, that he was called Our Lady of the Flowers. Both of them needed a rare flexibility to extricate themselves without damage from the snares that threatened their mutual esteem. On this occasion, Darling was all charm and delicacy. Our Lady of the Flowers was lying on a couch. Darling, seated at his feet, watched him confess. It was over as far as the murder was concerned. Darling was the theater of a muted drama. Confronting each other were the fear of complicity, friendship for the child, and the taste, the desire for squealing. He still had to admit to the nickname. Finally, he got to it, little by little. As the mysterious name emerged, it was so agonizing to watch the murderer's great beauty writhing, the motionless and unclean coils of the marble serpents of his drowsy face moving and stirring, that Darling realized the gravity of such a confession, felt it so deeply that he wondered whether Our Lady was going to puke pricks. He took one of the child's hands, which was hanging down, and held it between his own. You understand, there were guys that called me. Darling held on to his hand. With his eyes, he was drawing the confession toward him. It's coming. It's coming. During the entire operation, he did not take his eyes off the eyes of his friend. From beginning to end, he smiled, with a motionless smile that was fixed on his mouth, for he felt that the slightest emotion on his part, the slightest sign or breath, would destroy. It would have broken Our Lady of the Flowers.